technically Israel attacked Iranian soil directly.
They decided they're no longer happy with Iran supporting Hamas and decided to attack Iran.
Iran and Israel are playing games which are very similar.
Netanyahu's government is trying to change the perspective and trying to change the narrative.
I would assume that the United States will not support Israel in their retaliatory strikes against Iran.
Hi, my name is Alina Hrytsenko. I'm an international relations analyst, and this is Talking Substance, where we break down complex issues into simple truths. And today, I'm glad to welcome a very special guest, Iliya Kusa, who is an analyst at the Ukrainian Institute for the Future and an illustrious expert in the Middle Eastern affairs. And that leads me to announce the topic of today's discussion, which is the urgent topic of the global agenda. And you may be surprised, or maybe not, this is not Ukraine, this is Middle East. And we're going to talk about the developments that are happening in the region. Iran has launched the largest ever drone strike in the world, according to Al Jazeera, and the biggest missile attack in its history. There is no official, however, confirmation of how many drones or missiles were launched to attack Israel, but Israeli military said that more than 300 drones were used last week that happened. And for those who are out of the context, this attack was in retaliation for the previous Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus in Syria. And during that strike, 7 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members were killed, including 2, generals in charge of leading operations in Syria and Lebanon. And the Iranian IRGC, the abbreviation is so, dubbed the Operation True Promise to show that the top leaders of Iran, including Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, intend to make good on their vows to punish for attacks on Israel and others. So I guess we have to start just to explain a little bit for those people who are out of the context what actually happened. I mean, what did motivate Israel to make that attack, which happened, earlier this month, April 1st, So what happened? Why did they change focus on Iran? Was there any previous provocations from Iran towards Israel?
Hi, thank you for having me. Let's start from, I think, the fact that Iran and Israel have for years been engaged in a proxy conflict in the Middle East, which is, it wasn't a direct confrontation, and actually everyone was more or less comfortable with it. Israel was comfortable with waging a so-called shadow war, as it was dubbed in the media, against Iran, with sabotage, targeted killings, and attacks against pro-Iranian proxies in the region being, part of a daily routine, especially in the last 10 years since the war in Syria started, when Iran actually expanded its outreach and strengthened its influence in the region and near the border with Israel. Now, Iran was also happy with this kind of proxy war mode with Israel, because this way they avoided a direct confrontation with a far stronger enemy, much stronger enemy, like Israel, the United States, and their allies. And at the same time, they were able to conduct covert operations through their proxies in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, which were mainly paramilitary organizations deeply ingrained in the political system of these countries. For example, Hezbollah in Lebanon, or pro-Iranian paramilitary groups integrated into the Syrian armed forces, or different paramilitary organizations serving as supportive units to the Iraqi army in Iraq, like Qataib Hezbollah or the so-called popular mobilization forces and so on. So basically, this was the main format of Israel-Iran regional rivalry. Now, what happened is 7th of October, when Hamas militants attacked Israel, killed more than 1,000 civilians, and triggered a widespread war, full-scale war with Israel. And I think this was one of the reasons why Israel decided that the proxy war they used to wage against Iran is not comfortable anymore, because they started to, because while maintaining military superiority against Hamas, they began to lose this proxy war strategically and in terms of media information warfare, because after the first month of war in Gaza, everyone realized that the horrible pictures coming out of Gaza, they began to weaken Israel's image and reputation in the world. And this was pretty much in Iran's interest, because this way Iran was not responsible directly, because they were not directly involved in the Gaza war. They could sit on the sidelines, so to speak, and say, yeah, we're not involved anywhere. Yes, we are helping Hamas. We are, we're supporting Palestinian liberation movement and Palestinian people. And they could criticize Israel and the Western countries for double standards, for hypocrisy, for killing civilians, and so on, etc. And of course, I think this was one of possible reasons why Israel may have been inclined to move to change this format of war with Iran by breaching one of the red lines, which is a direct attack on Iranian soil. Of course, they couldn't. I think their calculations were that a direct attack against Iran was too risky, especially without support from their allies. So they decided to target one of their consulates in Damascus, of course, with an aim to kill the Iranian general, which was there at that time, meeting with other pro-Iran operatives, Mohammad Reza Zaghidi. He was an important man. He was responsible for Iran military operations, foreign military operations, including covert operations in Syria and Lebanon, and he was the main communication link between Iran and their proxies in Syria, Lebanon, and partly Iraq. And he may have been involved, due to his position, of course, he may have been involved in what was going on between Hamas and Iran, even prior to 7th of October last year. So by killing the general and by destroying the consulate, Israel breached one of the red lines, one of sort of taboos that were informal taboos that existed at that time, that, diplomatic premises were immune. And this is true because, it's rare when you see one country, directly attacking with military means diplomatic premises of another country, even if they have a sort of shadow war going on between them. And this prompted Iran response, which we saw, a couple of days ago.
So let me get this straight. Israel has been basically waging war in Gaza Strip for several months. And then they decided that they were waging war against Hamas, which is supported by Iran. So one day they decided they're no longer happy with Iran supporting Hamas and decided to attack Iran, which basically they attacked the territory because, as we all know, according to Vienna Convention, the territory of a consulate or an embassy is the territory of the country. So Iran could potentially have pretty much plausible arguments when it comes to the United Nations Security Council. Like, we have the right to make that attack, to make a strike, because that was basically self-defense. And this is the argument that Netanyahu's government is actively using when explaining their conduct in Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I mean,
So I see kind of a little contradiction here because
there are a lot of contradictions here, and I think this is fine because, for example, take this self-defense narrative. It's been used and exploited by everyone. Like Israel says that they were acting in self-defense because Iran was allegedly supporting Hamas. We don't know to what extent they were supporting Hamas, were they involved directly in the preparing of 7th of October attack or not. That doesn't matter. They think that Iran supported Hamas directly and they acted in self-defense. Iran, in turn, also uses this self-defense narrative, self-defense argument, saying that we were not the first to attack, which is true. I mean, in terms of direct confrontation, they were not the first to technically attack Israel. So, because by attacking their consulate, which is, according to international law, which is Iranian territory in Syria, so technically Israel attacked Iranian soil directly. Technically this is what happened, and so Iran also used this self-defense argument to say that we were not the first. We were just responding to what Israel did. So there is a lot of manipulation here. I don't think this is actually important right now because what happened has already happened, and so I don't think this is something that needs too much focus. Attention.
The question is, where is it all leading to? Because the question is, if Iran's positions in the region are changing, if their positions are getting stronger, because basically this strike proves their ability to counterstrike, right? To punish their enemies. And it's actually important because I think that their ability to deter was compromised after the 2020 attacks made by the United States after the assassination of General Soleimani.
Yes.
So is Iran's positions are getting stronger in the region? Is the reputation is changing after these strikes on Israel?
Iran's reputation,
right?
Iran's reputation has been I think static for many years.
Because we here believe, in Europe, we believe that Iran is sort of an outcast that everybody hates, even in the Middle East.
Iran is certainly not an outcast. It's not a rogue country which is isolated, diplomatically isolated. No, I mean, they have pretty decent level of relations with different countries in different regions. So I think that the fact that there are American sanctions imposed against Iran may convince some people to think that Iran is isolated, but American sanctions are not, they don't define a country being isolated or not. Take Russia, for example. It's under sanctions. It's isolated from the so-called Western countries, but it's not isolated in the non-Western world. So the same with Iran. The same goes with Iran, and I don't think it's about actually isolation or reputation. What is happening in the Middle East is, and the bottom line here is that Iran and Israel at some point stopped being comfortable, especially Israel, first of all, stopped being comfortable with the proxy nature of their rivalry. So for Israel, it just became unbearable to just sit and watch how Iran is not directly responsible for everything what's going on, when everyone knows that he's responsible because Iran is behind many operations. We all know, it's not a big secret that Iran has close ties with many paramilitary organizations and groups in different countries of the Middle East. So at some point Israel may have decided that it is high time that they bring war to Iran directly, that they try to involve Iran into this confrontation, because they know that Iran is not interested in this confrontation. They know that Iran is weak in terms of their national economy, which is true, and that in a direct war with the United States, Israel, and their European allies, Iran will lose, which is also probably true. And I think this is, I think the calculation here, the political calculation of the Netanyahu government is that they may have thought that by targeting Iran's consulate, by provoking Iran into direct response, into direct attack against Israel, they will try to involve Iran into the direct war with themselves and the United States into this war. They will try to attract, to make Americans their allies in a potential confrontation, armed confrontation with Iran. And by doing that, the Israelis believe, as I understand, that this will lead either to strikes together with their allies, to strikes against Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure, and subsequently, it will lead to de-escalation, to Iran changing its behavior. For example, they would think that Iran would be afraid of going to war directly with the United States and Israel, and this will somehow lead to Iran coming to making some concessions. For example, curtailing some of their regional activities in the region, or for example, reducing their support for Hamas, or reducing their attacks against Israel from neighboring countries. One of the main concerns that Israel has is their northern border with Lebanon, where you have Hezbollah on the other side of the border, striking Israeli positions and including civilian infrastructure on a daily basis. And this is one of the main concerns that Israelis have. They want Iran either to stop these attacks or to involve allies from the West in order to internationalize this war. So basically, Israel is interested in internationalizing war in Gaza and while their Western partners and Iran are interested in localizing this war. So this is the main thing that we're watching right now, and I think this will lead to escalation in the short-term perspective, but then I think that all sides will come to a negotiations table, and they will, I think, the logic here is that they will de-escalate eventually.
It seems to me that Netanyahu's government is trying to change the perspective and trying to change the narrative because, like, at a finger snap, the world's attention shifted from the problem in Gaza Strip, from the sufferers of the civilians, from the humanitarian crisis happening in the region, towards Israel. And as you mentioned, that Tel Aviv actually lost the information war, and the world's perspective towards Israel is not that Israel is a victim of the Hamas attack, but the world actually judges Israel's conduct in Gaza Strip. So now it seems like Netanyahu's government is trying to change the perspective and trying to change the narrative that Israel is actually a victim in this conflict, and it deserves sort of a support and help from its allies, but not the world being judgmental towards the Netanyahu government.
This is one of the possible reasons why they decided to attack Iranian consulate, maybe. Because for Netanyahu personally and politically, internationalizing Gaza war would really change the focus from what's going on in Gaza to what's going on in the Middle East. And this is one way to mobilize allies.
Like there's to mobilize allies because there's Iran with unpredictable leadership,
nuclear weapons.
Nuclear
sure.
weapons.
This is something that they think would attract allies, would bring allies around to support Israel rather than to criticize it daily.
Yeah, and this is the bigger nuclear Iran is a bigger problem than civilians in Gaza.
Which
right?
it is a bigger problem in terms of perspective and on a regional level and a global level. And for Netanyahu personally, this is important because the ruling coalition in Israel is fragile, and
the pressure on him is quite high.
The pressure is enormous, and he's trying to balance between different parts of Israeli societies, which are divided over over the war itself, over the over the hostage issue, which is still not resolved, over how to end this war, over what would become of Gaza in future. So all these questions, they're still unanswered, and the Israeli government probably either doesn't have answers or doesn't want to answer them. And so politically, it is in Netanyahu's interest to shift the focus from Gaza to Iran, to involve Iran in direct confrontation, to maybe weaken it militarily, and to mobilize Western allies to once again support Israel rather than criticize it for what's happening in Gaza.
I guess that brings us to realize that there's a risk that probably a lot depends on the personal factor, I guess, human factor.
Sure.
And that my point is that is there a risk if Netanyahu, who's definitely not the only one person in the military cabinet who decides on the further development of the operation in Gaza Strip, as well as how to respond to Iran's attack, is Netanyahu going to decide on a direct attack on Iran, for example, Iranian's nuclear facilities, to earn some support, to gain some support from the opposition and from the society, which are quite critical towards Netanyahu, including everything that was happening before the Hamas attack in October, like the legal reform, because there were massive protests in Israel. So is Netanyahu going to somehow make a radical step forward to earn people's support? Is there any chance that they decide? I do understand that there is a war cabinet that decides on the further actions, and the war cabinet is a inter-party, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Inter-party establishment. So there are several people from both, the leading party and the opposition. So it helps to balance the perspective and to balance the point of view, because Netanyahu's government is believed to be the most right in the history of Israel.
Yeah, it's the most right-wing government.
So there's, I guess, there's a risk that the Netanyahu can decide on making a radical step forward towards Iran, which can ignite a regional war.
Probably.
Full-scale war, I mean.
In my opinion, there are two types of response the Israelis may come down to in the end, which will tell us to what extent, they will be ready to escalate.
What's on the menu?
Yeah, so two types. We have two things on the menu. One, they will attack Iran directly. So this will be something similar to what Iran did to Israel, only vice versa. So Israel will attack some military objects, maybe air bases or some nuclear facilities. But I think I tend to think that this will be they will avoid nuclear sites. That maybe they will attack some military facilities and bases. It is unlikely that they will deal some kind of a heavy damage to Iran's military infrastructure, but yes, they will attack Iran directly. And this will lead to further escalation. Iran will respond, and Israel will come back to respond, and we will see a series of mutual strikes until either both sides are satisfied with whatever they will achieve, or when the international community's pressure will be so high that they will be forced to stop and de-escalate. The second type of response may look like Israel's attack, a large-scale, a series of strikes against Iran's proxies in the region. So Syria, Lebanon, Iraq may be targets. And this type of attack will basically signal that Israel is not ready for further escalation, and that Israel is ready to make concessions to predominantly American pressure. Because the Americans, they are now even publicly saying that Israel should not respond to Iran's attack and should, stop there and de-escalate. So I expect Israel to choose one of these. And this will tell us to what extent we may expect escalation.
From my perspective, the second option is going to ruin Netanyahu's reputation to the ground. There will be no other option for him just to step aside to leave the position of the prime minister.
I think as soon as as long as the war in Gaza continues, it is unlikely he will leave his post, because it will do a lot of damage to the ruling coalition up to the moment when they will be forced to have another snap elections. So,
but is it going to show Netanyahu as a weak leader? The second option,
for right-wing ministers, yes, of course. Okay. This is why they are demanding, a direct response and direct strike against Iran. But the Israeli opposition is more cautious, as I see, as judging from their statements, and they are more in close communication with their American counterparts, and they tend to think that it's better to de-escalate now and maybe, for example, respond later, when war in Gaza is over, for example. So what the opposition proposes is basically let us return to the proxy war we have got used to, which is one of the options. Because again, this is Iran and Israel are playing games which are very similar. By striking the Iranian consulate, Israel dared Iran to attack because they knew that Iran would be compelled to respond. Also because they will need to save face politically. The same happened after Iran responded. Israel's Netanyahu need to save face politically, and that's why it will be a political decision. First and foremost, this is about politics. So, right. They have, it's paradoxically, but Iran and Israel have a somewhat similar situation politically. In both countries, you have radicals, people with radical views, national conservatives in the government. And by the way, I think the situation in Iran is also difficult because of the so-called transit period. They are now expecting a transit of power in the country because their supreme leader, the so-called supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, he's old, and it is expected that he will
die.
He will die, or he will go, or maybe he will go he will leave his post in favor of someone younger. This is also something that may happen, and there is a struggle inside Iran over who will take over. And of course, again, as in the government, as in the parliament, as in the army and the military establishment, in clergy, you also have more conservative leaning people and more, like moderate reformists. And so now the situation is that in Iran, the conservatives in Iran, they are demanding that Iran continues this escalation up to the point when they will wage a regional war against Israel, because they think that Iran is now in a good position to attack Israel because Israel is, weakened. Now, on the other side, you have reformists and moderates who say that, no, we don't need to go into direct confrontation with Israel, because this would drag us into the war with the United States, which we will lose because of the weak economy and, many other consequences. And so, so these Israel and Iran, they have very similar domestic political situations which shape their decisions.
Okay. According to the Jerusalem Post, I read this article this morning, the Israel Defense Forces have already decided on what their response to the Iranian attack is going to be. But I guess that means that there's a question, not if, but when, where, and how, what kind of objects are they going to strike. So the option that just to, let it go and go with the flow is not an option?
Maybe. We don't know. It's still the question of what type of attack Israeli government will choose still in the air. So they didn't answer that question. They just said, okay, we will not attack today or tomorrow. We will attack at some time when it's convenient for us. That's it. But that doesn't mean that they decided to de-escalate. We don't know that yet.
Yeah, so hypothetically, if Israel decides to strike directly the Iranian territory, what potentially the reaction of the U.S. political establishment is going to be? Because it was announced by the White House representative, I believe it was Mr. Kirby, that the U.S. is not interested, but they're still going to provide the necessary aid and support to Israel and to protect Israel as they have to, as they should do. So what kind of a reaction can we wait for from the United States if Israel? So are they gonna just say like, hello, this is our ally, we're gonna do whatever we're gonna do? Are they gonna judge Israel probably because they are against the escalation of the situation in the region? Are there gonna be any judgmental?
Yeah, I think I would assume that the United States will not support Israel in their retaliatory strikes against Iran.
If this is a direct, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
they will probably say something like, we don't support that. They already publicly stated that they will not join Israel in any offensive operations against Iran. So they will say something similar like that. So we don't support that. We call on all parties for restraint, to de-escalate, something like that. But at the same time, if Iran attacks again, they will defend. They will help Israel defend itself, of course.
And what about Britain? Because Lord David Cameron today is in Israel, which was quite surprising for me because I didn't actually expect him to go. I would rather expect someone from the U.S. government, from the perhaps Antony Blinken to visit Israel to have some discussions with the Israeli government towards the further actions, but not the British foreign minister. So that was quite surprising. What interest does Britain have, in terms of the conflict?
I think the UK doesn't have that much different of interest than the rest of Europe and the United States, especially with Europe, because and they have already stated many times, and Cameron himself said that they are not interested in regional escalation. And I think this is even more true about Europe than the United States, because it is a direct threat to Europe. A destabilization of the Middle East as a result of a possible regional war with the involvement of Iran, Israel, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, the United States, may have catastrophic consequences for the European security. So that's why I think I would not be surprised if a British foreign minister is in Israel to actually speak about de-escalation, so to convince the Israeli government that maybe we need to take a pause, to stop, to think about this. So but again, the UK, as well as France and Germany and all major European powers, they will do the same as the United States. They will not support Israel in any offensive operations against Iran, but they will support Israel in defending itself, as they did during the recent Iran attack.
But basically, Israelis were the first.
Huh?
Basically, Israelis were the first. They didn't have to make that strike on the consulate.
Yeah, but this isn't important anymore.
Okay.
No, this really isn't important. I mean, we can have this discussion. We can go forever, in this discussion. Who was the first?
Right.
Yeah, let's go back to 1990s and 2000s, to the start of Iran's nuclear program. We can even go back to the start
1979.
Yeah, I mean, this is to the Islamic Revolution and everything. So there is no point in this discussion. So it doesn't matter anymore. So yes, Iran's attack against Israel was a direct response to the Israeli strike against their consulate. That's a fact. But
what does Israel actually want from Iran? Hypothetically, will they be happy with sort of a negotiations agreement that Iran perhaps rejects from further support of Hamas and other paramilitary proxies forces, or they're gonna probably bring down their nuclear program? Or is there something more radical that Israel wants, for example, like to overthrow the leadership?
No, I don't think so. Well,
That would be
overthrowing
like the perfect scenario for Israel if
maybe,
there is all
maybe.
over new sort of a democratic, so to speak, leadership in Iran.
Yes, I think. Well,
To bring monarchy probably back to Iran. Will that be like the perfect scenario for Tel Aviv?
I mean, even in the years of
Hypothetic.
even during the years of Shah in Iran, the relations between Iran and Israel were not ideal. They still had, they were rocky at some periods, but they were better.
But I guess Iran was the only country in the Middle East who supported diplomatic relationships with Israel.
Yes, but only because, first of all,
The US.
Iran during Shah years, they didn't have a nuclear nuclear program. So, and secondly, they were united. They were one together with Israel. I think one of primary U.S. allies in the region. So I would say that Israel's strategic objectives, as I see them at least, and judging, including judging from what they said in Israel and what they constantly say about this issue, is first of all, Iran should stop arming, financing, and supporting Hamas and other Palestinian national movements. Secondly, withdrawal of all Iranian operatives from neighboring countries with Israel, which is Lebanon, Syria. Iraq is not that important, but Lebanon and Syria, first of all, because these countries, they are just at the border with Israel. This means that Iran should get out of these countries all their Islamic Revolutionary Corps operatives that are there in the country, and where they serving as military advisors. And some of them are actually recruited at the embassies and consulates, which is why Israel decided to strike at the consulate, because such people as General Zahedi, who was killed during the Israeli strike, they sometimes have a diplomatic post. So they are posted at the embassy, but in reality, they are military. So they are posted as first, second secretaries, but in reality, they may have additional functions like the military advisor or this informal function of maintaining ties with local proxies. So this is second one. Third one, Iran should stop supporting their proxies all over the region. This means that Iran should break ties, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with pro-Iran groups in Syria, with different political and military groups in Iraq. So something like that. This is what the United States called Iran's malign activity in the Middle East. So something like that. And ideally, of course, Iran should freeze its nuclear and rocket program.
Which is not happening anytime soon, because Iran has also its own perspective of self-defense.
Yeah, I think nothing of this is happening. Not because Iran is evil and that's it, which is a very dumb explanation.
But this is a global stereotype that Iran has its nuclear, is like developing its nuclear arsenal just because it's evil.
Yeah, but it's a dumb explanation.
And an axis of evil axis or what?
Sure, you can, whatever. So you can think of Iran as you can think in categories of evil and good. You can live in Disney World if you want. Just but just don't try doing an analysis in international relations.
This is a narrative that the Western politicians are trying to move forward. Like Iran is evil. This is an existential threat to Israel, and Iran is evil just by its nature because, they're radical Islamists or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay for an okay level, analysis of international relations. But I think that, of course, every decision, everything has its roots, its cause, its causes. So Iran started to develop their nuclear program. I think even, the first plans to develop nuclear program were designed during Shah years.
Yeah, actually,
even before
the revolution,
his fall, yes. So he had these ambitions. Then the Islamic Revolution came and they decided to continue continue this program, not immediately, by the way, but in 20 years, in 1990s, this became public knowledge, and that's when this regional rivalry between Israel and Iran started. And but before that, Israel even supported Iran after the Islamic Revolution. For example, during their war with Iraq in 1980, 1988, Israel was one of the primary exporters of arms to Iran. So this is so now it's for Iran. Many of those things that I mentioned, their support for regional proxies, regional military for paramilitary groups, their support for Hamas, which is mainly a temporary partnership, let's call it something like that, because Hamas was not a project of Iran prior to contrary to what public may think. Hamas was a project, an entirely different project.
So those were like radical Palestinians who wanted to create an independent
They
Palestinian
are an
state.
Offshoot of Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
A Sunni radical Islamist group, which has never had close ties with Iran. It's actually was hostile to Iran in some periods, but of course Iran maintained relations with Hamas recently. They have developed them recently because they saw an opportunity for them to weaken Israel. So that's a fact. So for Iran doing all that, it's in their view, it's a way to project power in the region, to defend what they see as their, sovereignty, as their security, as their regional security interests, and to make others talk with them. So to force other players, regional players and global players like the United States, to include Iran's interests, regional interests, in their global plans. It's very similar to how Russia sees the world. That Russia started war in Ukraine. In terms of global politics, Russia started this war in order to show
in terms of self-defense as well.
They also use
own
this.
Perception,
That's
right?
why I said that this, this narrative is just, they invaded Ukraine in 22 because globally this was their way of trying to show the world, and first of all the United States, whom they see as their primary rival, to show the United States that they are capable of defending their what they view as their sphere of influence. So they basically wanted to force the West to accept that Russia has their own interests, their own sphere of interest, their own kind of zone of interest, of comfort. You may call it whatever you want. And this is the same about Iran. So they think that this is the way to project power in the region, to defend themselves from what they see as their threat, because this is, Israel sees a direct threat to themselves from the Iranian nuclear program, which may be true, but in the same way, Iran sees a threat in Israel as the primary ally, because they think that Israel is the American instrument of American expansion in the region. So this is a clash of ideologies. There is a little bit of paranoia, I think, in Iran's foreign policy, which is historically rooted, by the way. So it's something that has been developed, that has a long history in Iran's political culture, I think, especially after 1953, when their relations with the United States broke after the United States conducted a coup d'etat, which ended their, let's say, early democratic experiments.
Okay.
So and brought Shah to power. So I think that, this is a clash. This is something that's why all these demands that Israel and Iran have against each other, they are unrealistic today. So I don't imagine a situation when Iran will voluntarily give up on all these things that they see as assets, in projecting power. The same thing as I don't imagine that Israel will, make concessions and also give up on all their ambitions in the region and trying to curtail Iranian behavior, and they will just say, okay, let's talk, it's okay, we can normalize relations. No, of course not.
Well, then that has to be a way for coexistence. And in terms of projecting power, as you mentioned, It seemed to me that after the U.S. withdrew from the region, their withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, it seemed to me that there was a vacuum of power, and some of the regional countries, like Saudi Arabia, for example, wanted to fulfill with their own power, with projecting their own power. So the question is, if there are any tendencies happening in the region for any country like Saudi Arabia to prove its leadership, its leading positions, to project their power, and to perhaps step forward as a potential mediator or negotiator between Israel and Iran, which could be beneficial for all of the countries of the region and potentially for the globe.
Yeah, I think so. United States attempts to reduce their engagement in the Middle East, in the Middle Eastern affairs, actually, I would say, triggered this new wave of regional competition, including maybe stimulating Iran to try to expand more, and giving more leeway to regional countries with ambitions and resources to also expand to also play more active role in regional political developments, such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt. And today, these countries are under enormous pressure, and I think this situation is one of many which is a test for them. It's a challenge that they need to address in order to prove that they are capable of actually trying to build some kind of a new post-American, as they say, regional security architecture. But it's difficult for them because, for example, take this Iran-Israel escalation. The majority of Arab countries in the Middle East, they don't want direct Israel-Iran confrontation because they think that this will A, destabilize the region, B, shift their focus from domestic economic development to war, C, force them to maybe go to war and choose sides, which they don't want to do. And finally, a direct Israel-Iran escalation will probably make many of these countries potential targets because, for example, Iran may return to these to attacks against American bases, which are scattered around the Middle East, mostly in the Gulf countries, in Iraq, and this will make these countries potential targets, which they don't want to be. And so that's why Gulf monarchies, for example, today they are lobbying for de-escalation heavily, and they are also supporting American and European mediation on de-escalation, and they are trying to convince Israel to also not respond to Iran's attack, while also not trusting Iran, but they are mostly defending their own interests. Right now, I don't see any prospect in short-term perspective for regional countries to take over. But I think that the trend shows us that there is a clear trend that the United States will not return to active involvement in the Middle Eastern affairs, and they will. And so, at some point, there will be a new post-American regional architecture, security architecture in the Middle East, and coexistence between Iran and Israel will be an integral part of it. So, depending on how Israel and Iran will address this issue of coexistence, so whether they will come to the coexistence through war or whether they will come to it through negotiated de-escalation, it doesn't matter. But when they come to this format of coexistence, there will be some kind of coexistence in future. They will not be in state of shadow war for forever. This will be an integral. This will actually help stabilize the Middle East and create this new balance of power, regional balance of power, a post-American one, which everyone is, talking today, but not now, not in the near months and maybe years, because right now many regional countries, they are either weak or they're not ready for this challenge, or they still perceive the United States as the primary foreign power, or they may lack resources, they may lack political will. So, and also there are many other challenges. So not only Iran-Israel coexistence is one question, but Palestinian issue is the second one. Tackling crisis in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Libya, Yemen are also challenges that need to be addressed in order to move closer to this notion of a new post-American stable and peaceful Middle East.
Okay, so I guess everything that's left for us is the anticipation of how the situation is going to evolve. But the picture is clear. Thank you very much, Iliya, for making it so for us. And this is Talking Substance. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. And we're going to hear you and see you in the next episode.